Okay. Hey, Neil McDonnell here. I'm the president of the GovCon Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to my daily LinkedIn Live, where I discuss process and procedures for you to achieve success in the federal market. I've spent 20 years in the federal space as a small business owner, and since 2018, I've really been focused on teaching people like you how to succeed in government contracting. And that government contracting is not a secret, it's just a process. Thanks, James. Thanks, Thurman. Appreciate it. So that process is A to Z, and one step along that process relates to CPARS, and that's what I want to talk to you today about. I'm going to give you 5 tips on on how to have great CPARS from the federal government, and I'll begin with what CPARS are. So we're going to get started with that. I'm just looking here to make sure I'm tracking my time. Okay, just to level set for everybody, in case you're not totally familiar with CPARS. So the Contractor Performance Assessment Reporting System, or CPARS, right? Forget about the name after this. It's just CPARS. The CPARS is basically Yelp for government contracting, right? You have a buyer and a seller. If I go get a haircut and I want to leave a review, I can, and I'm leaving them a review. And sometimes Yelp's guiding me through how was the professionalism, were they punctual, things like that. And if I switch over to the government contracting side of the house, it's the same thing. How did they feel about us as sellers delivering to them? Somebody had a great question about whether this is going to apply to a prime or a sub. And so let me change that a teeny bit. Does this apply to me if I don't have money or I do have money? It definitely is more, today's live is more applicable to those of you who are already doing business with the government. As a sub or a large doesn't necessarily, a prime doesn't really matter. It'll matter in a second. I'll describe more about that. But if you're not making any money, today's topic is more of a just in case bit of information for you, not a just in time, like I need it right now. So if you're not making revenue, you want to be, knocking on doors of small businesses getting in. Today's topic is for people who are in with the government buyer. How do you get CPARS, good ratings? Or if you're a subcontractor, kind of how do you get good ratings? It is useful information to the rest of you, but it's not necessary at all to the people who aren't making money. Let's just put that in perspective so you can decide whether you continue watching this. But CPARS is the way the government measures you. And so let's talk a little bit more about where it comes out of, right? It's coming out of the FAR, and I don't want to go too far into that, but if you want to go research it yourself, which I highly recommend once you get to the stage of paying attention to CPARS, go to FAR subpart 4215, the Contractor Performance Information section. And no, I have no CPARS or FAR thing memorized in my head. It's written right in front of me, and I'm telling you for it. But there's guidance out there for CPARS. You want to see how the government talks to themselves about CPARS, but that's what I'm basically going to summarize for you. So let's just level set on why CPARS are important, and they are very important to sales going forward as your company matures and as you start having past performances. This is the rating of your past performance. So the first thing is, when you're going after future opportunities, past performance is really important. They have a pricing section, they have a technical approach and a management approach, and then they have a past performance, or what's your experience section. And so obviously they're looking for your description of similar size project, et cetera. But what they want to see is, who else have you worked for in the government and how have they rated your performance? And so it's really important to be able to get good CPARS ratings. And I'll talk about those in a second. But just understanding that it's very important. If the government is thinking about going with you, they're going to look right at your CPARS. They're going to go into the CPARS environment and see if your company is listed in there and what are your ratings. And if you're getting a bunch of unsatisfactories, then you're not getting the business, right? So you want to pay attention to that. It's a tool they're looking at, and you can control it to a degree. The second thing is that buyers must use the CPARS when they're making contract awards. And so understand more about how they use that tool themselves. And the last thing, as it relates to why is it important, and this really matters to me, is that it differentiates you from your competitors. Most competitors who do a good job might get a satisfactory rating. If you don't do something to get higher than a satisfactory, which is the middle of the road, then you're just going to sit there, right? And and I'll come back to this in more detail later, but basically the person who's filling out your CPARS ratings is just going, yep, check, check, check. You did a satisfactory job. You met the expectations. Great. But the reality is you want to get very good or exceptional. These are two of the other ratings. And so if you have those, if you have exceptional ratings or exceptional CPAR ratings, then that will be a differentiator when you're going to write your proposal and try to beat out your competitors. We demonstrate that we do good work as seen through our exceptional CPARs compared to your competitors who go, we demonstrate that we do good work as seen by us saying that we do good work, right? So it's better to have a buyer be able to give you a good rating. So let's talk, since I've talked about this a little bit, let's talk about the CPARS rating levels. And there's 5 levels that come up. They start with unsatisfactory at the very bottom, then marginal, then the middle of the road, which is satisfactory, very good, and exceptional. So forget about below satisfactory. I'm not here to talk to you about those, right? But let's talk about satisfactory. Satisfactory, the way I summarize what's in the FAR, et cetera, is that that you've met the requirements that are in your proposal and in your contract with the government. You've met the requirements, and if any problems have risen, you've resolved them satisfactorily. So it doesn't mean that you don't have problems come up. Problems sometimes come up, but let's say you're responsible for making sure a building is secure, and there was a problem. A door is not locking. Well, you come in, you hear about it, you change the lock so it's more secure, and you shut it, and you go, see, problem's good. Then that's fine. You're not going to get dinged or penalized by the government because you didn't, because that problem rose up. They don't care about the problem so much. Yes, they do. But what they care about is, are you resolving it to our satisfaction? Now, separate LinkedIn Live, we can talk about how to avoid problems in the first place. But as you go forward, coming up in the ratings, satisfactory is the middle of the road. I've often heard stories across every agency where the contracting officer or whoever is designated to fill out the CPARS for you is it's just this extra responsibility that's thrown on their shoulders. It's similar to supervisors who have to fill out annual reviews of their employees. And a lot of these employees are their close colleagues throughout the year, and then they got to fill it out. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is so tough. Well, CPARS is kind of like that. Compared to you, CPARS is this exciting thing. It's a chance for us to showcase ourselves. We can differentiate ourselves from our competitors. It's a really important thing to you, and you feel really passionate about getting it done right. Where I would argue that the person who has to do it on the government side, the customer, it's more of just a job task that they're stuck with, and they got a whole bunch of contracts at the end of the year that they're having to do this for. So in a minute, I'm going to come back and talk about how do you help them. But satisfactory is the easiest way for them to go, yes, this contractor met all the obligations. No problems weren't resolved. They're good. Satisfactory. You can equate satisfactory basically to C in school or something, right? I'm getting a C average grade. You don't want average. So coming above that is very good and exceptional. And very good is about you're meeting those expectations and you're exceeding some of the requirements. And then the other one is problems were resolved with effectiveness. And then on exceptional is problems were resolved with high effectiveness. For example, a problem comes up and you can demonstrate how you got in, you're instantly triaged it, got it squared away. And then as the as you move forward, you put in place recommendations or tools or processes that would prevent this problem from occurring again. And if it ever did, you've put in place tools or processes that will notify us long before it ever impacts the user. So that's a highly effective way of addressing the problems. And then exceptional talks about meets and exceeds many requirements. And this is where I want to go into one of my first tips, right? And my tips will be blended in, but at the end of this live, I'll tell you all 5 of them again. But one of my main tips is that you want to make sure you're talking with the government buyer, your core and your contracting officer and your program manager on the government side, right? You want to be talking to them. Typically, when you have a contract, kickoff, you're going to have a kickoff meeting, right? And you should have a kickoff every option year that goes out. Don't just do it at the beginning of a base and not forward. So every year you're coming back saying, can we clarify what we're going to do? What are your expectations? Here's our expectations. So you're just in general talking about the project. Excuse me. My first tip to you is to actually have some dialogue and make sure you communicate this with them, that I want to know what is meeting requirements. Let's just confirm that. And a lot of us might go, oh, well, it's right there in the documentation. No. You've got to have the conversation. There's a great quote out there that the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it took place at all. The biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it happened at all. And that's what I'm saying here. The illusion to us is that our communication is happening right here in the contract papers we sign. That's not what I'm saying. We're sitting down with the people at the beginning of the year who are going to rate us at the end of the year. Take a minute and say, hey, can I just go over this? If we do all this from a CPARS rating, this is what we expect to is required to get satisfactory. Yes, that's correct. Okay, what I would like to talk about is what can we do to get very good or exceptional? And start having that conversation now. You might not resolve it all at all in the beginning, but you get that conversation going. And this goes into my second tip of make sure you train the government side of the house and your team who's working on the project. Make sure you train them both on what CPARS is. If we walk in and think, oh, the government knows what a CPARS is, or the government knows how to do CPARS, then again, it's that illusion that communication is happening at all. They might be aware of it, but an example of one way to train your customer is, do they understand how important CPARS is to you and your company, right? So what I'm training you today, by the way, is what I expect you to go back and tell people in your company. It's like, hey, this is what we're learning on CPARS, so we should pay attention. But it's the same thing here. You want to make sure you teach the government buyer how important it is. This could make the difference between us winning or losing a $10 million contract, let's say. If we don't have the right CPARS, if it's just satisfactory, understand that the CPARS is tough for them because it's just this exercise in writing from their standpoint. So having those conversations early and often with your core, with your KO, and your program office, and your program office, you can talk to them separately, by the way, as you continue to go along early on in the year about making sure they understand. Often program office people, the people, let's say, who are doing the work, are really disconnected from the buying or acquisition side of the process, and especially when it comes to CPARS, et cetera. And so having those conversations about what would it take for me to exceed the requirements. I have some ideas as we go forward, and what would it take for me to just really exceed all of the requirements. Having that conversation early on is a great tip. Tip two, make sure you train people. The third thing is to pay attention as you go along through the year, right? That the CPARS rating is your responsibility at the end. You want to take complete control of that. Obviously, the government buyer is going to run it. Obviously, it's them leading it. But you want to control it as much as you can. And one of the ways you can do it is that early clarification. The second way is, as you're going forward, have weekly meetings. It takes 15 minutes to have a weekly meeting with people on your team. How's the project going? Are we meeting all the expectations? Are we doing anything that's exceeding the expectations? Create a training. This is what I do with a lot of customers, where I create training for the people who are inside, and I teach them about how do you identify something that is exceeding the requirements. Excuse me. We need to teach those people, look, we're not saying we're not going to do it because it's not in scope. What we want is credit at the end that we did exceed scope, if that's what you choose to do, right? That's up to you. But exceed the requirements, right? If the requirements is you need to have 98% uptime, but something you do is 99% uptime. If the requirements is that you must have an 80% approval rate from the user base of a bathroom that it's clean, for example, well, what if we get 90% approval rate when people are surveyed? Those kind of things to teach the folks who are doing the work on your team to be aware of those, and will be great. And you want to be writing it down. And if you get in the habit of saying this every week and spending 5 to 15 minutes maximum just to remember CPARS, anything we did well, and then going with the other part, anything that didn't go well. So any problems, first off, everybody should know that in your company there should be an escalation path. How do we get this up? But how are we uh, addressing the problems? So teaching your people how to identify problems that maybe aren't stated, or if those problems come up, making sure that, in particular, the program manager in your company is aware of the problem, clarifying it back, and then you should be talking with the government program manager and core about, hey, we took that problem, we resolved it satisfactorily, or hey, we did this and we feel like we resolved it with a lot of effectiveness. Do you agree? And this goes to the last thing, getting things in writing, right? Is when you're working with a customer, if they say something good about you, document those kudos, is what we call them, right? Hey, you guys did a great job on the project, etc. Also document the problems, and the problems, not just, hey, here were the things we ran into, but here's what we did to resolve it, how fast we resolved it. Here's some extra effort we put in. For example, we're only supposed to solve a problem during business hours, but we knew it was really important to the customer because they had something important. So we came in over the weekend or at night. Well, that's exceeding expectations. I actually don't think it's that big of a deal. I think you should do it. But in the government's eyes, in this CPARS world, you are absolutely exceeding the requirements, and you should get the government to give you something back. You don't want to nickel and dime it so much that you get stuff, you're just bugging them. But you do want to pay attention to documenting and getting them to document it with you. If somebody on the government side could say, man, you guys did a fantastic job. I know you don't have to come in on weekends, but you did. Excuse me, could you send me an email with exactly what you just said and copy the KO and core? And by the way, let me do a little refresher training. When you do that, we look good. And when we go after other opportunities, because you like how we're working, other people go, well, if John likes how these guys are working, then maybe these guys will work great for us, right? There's this whole process that flows out there. So Joshua has a good point. I might pause there for 1 second. One of the beauties of the past few years is that CPARS has come along from a sub perspective as well. And I'm stretching his topic a little bit, but the CPARS used to be just rating the prime contractor. Now they've extended it, depending on size of contract, to include subcontractors. But the flip side is you can also treat the prime as your government customer and get them to give you feedback as well. So definitely be getting your Yelp reviews for subcontracting too. Okay, so I talked about the beginning of a year, let's say, and every option year, repeat exactly what I'm telling you. Train your people is a big portion. And then the last part that I want to talk about is when the CPARS is getting ready to come, you're getting ready to write it. So that last quarter, you want to kind of refresh the memory of your core. If that's who's taking the lead, you want to find out who is going to write it. Is it the person who's been paying attention to you? So the last 3 months at least, you want to begin to research. Ask the KO, who's going to write our CPARS? We want to make sure they know who we are. They don't just go into a bunch of paperwork and write the CPARS. That happens. Is sometimes somebody to be thrown on your contract to write a CPARS, even though they had nothing to do with you, because the government's overwhelmed, they're busy. Well, if you can have a body of data and evidence, is what I call it. Well, now you've lined this up, and you've kept the KO and the core informed. But if you're getting kudos and you're documenting problems that are resolved effectively to a high effectiveness from the program office, then whoever writes that CPARS will be ready. So that last quarter, begin to find out who that is. There's a person whose job is to manage that whole process. The other is to remember that you can provide input. So the sooner you're kind of summarizing it, saying, hey, I know we're getting ready for CPARS season. I'd like to just provide this summary of where we're at. And sometimes, whether it's right or wrong is not what I'm here to talk about, but sometimes people will pick up what you write and put it down somewhere else, right? Sometimes that happens. If you do this and write in each one of the areas that you get rated on, for example, one of the areas that 7 areas that I wrote down on what they write, right? CPARS rates meeting the requirements, forecasting and controlling your cost, adhering to schedule, commitment to customer satisfaction, timely and accurate reporting, integrity and business ethics, and then concern for the customer's interest. There's 7 of these. And if you know what these 7 are and you track on them with your team all through the year, when you get to this CPARS last quarter and you're writing something, you might be able to write in those 7 bullets saying, hey, CPARS writer, I wanted to share you a self-assessment. And we believe we deserve exceptional rating for these reasons. If you do that stuff, then you'll be able to give them a head start. And if they have to write a bunch of CPARs, they might really appreciate the fact that they can cut and paste, or they can see it and go reference it to the source, like the core or the program office people, et cetera. So, the one other thing I didn't mention during the year, if you don't do this, make sure you have monthly performance reviews. So every month I would have a performance review. You could set it for an hour, and it's a recurring meeting that you want to have with your contracting officer, your program office, program manager, and your core. At least those 3 people are in charge of your contract, and their job is to protect the government's interest in the money. And so it's in their interest to get these monthly reports. And in the monthly reports, you want to do whatever normal reporting you do for, let's say, 50, 60% of the time. And then a portion is you want to, have a set of slides that speaks in CPARS language, but doesn't have to say the word CPARS, but talks about, hey, in the last month, these are some of the things we did exceptionally well. This is a couple of problems we had, and here's how we resolved them to a high level of effectiveness. If you use some of that language, you're training, which is fine. You're training the people who are going to rate you on what to be thinking. You don't want them to randomly think about stuff. You want them to think about stuff that you did well, whether it's problems or requirements exceeded. And the government's okay with that, right? They're smart people. They can add in their own stuff. And you're not saying anything that theoretically isn't 100% understood and backed up by them. So the last couple of tips I just wanted to share that are in there. So let me see. What if I'm going to look at some of these questions. What if you did those suggestions, but in the end, a random person at the facility? That's funny. Somebody was like right ahead of I didn't even see that question. The person who wrote, what if a random person does it? And that's what I mean, right? You want to get this documentation. It's called data and evidence. And then you put it in their hand, because I got to tell you, that random person's feeling bad too. It's like, darn, I got to write a CPARS. I don't even know what these guys are doing. And so if you can provide them not just your own opinion, but documented proof about, hey, here's what my government stakeholders have said about us, not just program people too. If you work with customers of your customers, having them shoot a little note or something, that's your job, is to get good feedback. Frankly, just to equate it to if you were an employee getting an annual review, well, your job at the beginning of the year of 2022, let's say, is to say, hey, boss, what do I need to do to exceed your expectations and the company's expectations? What do I need to be in the top 1% of our rating system, right? What do I need to do? And then the other thing you need to do is make sure that as you go through the year, you're having a monthly meeting with your boss just on that. Hey, I don't want to get to the end of the annual review, and that's when we talk. So I want to talk for 30 minutes. I feel like I'm doing great. What's your thoughts? Good. Can I get that in writing? And as you get to the end, you get a good annual review, and it's the same thing here. So, and then Thurman, some of these tips are a closed mouth won't get fed, or at least that's the way I'm hearing it. Good stuff. Oh, that's funny. If I'm following what you're saying about closed mouth won't get fed, if I change it, squeaky wheel gets oil. So yes, if you keep your mouth closed, you're not going to get fed. And that's what the largest do. They have people who are just good. They have former contracting officers, right? When you're a large firm, you have all the access to experience and resources, but that's all you need to do is help it be easy for the other people to give you a good rating. I'm getting to the end, and I just want to see, I had a whole bunch of extra small tips I wanted to say here, but definitely like getting emails, plan exceptional. I think the rest of these are exactly what I want to share. So let me just go to my last slide that I'm looking at as I'm talking to you. But just a summary of the 5 tips that I talked about for getting a great CPARS or an exceptional CPARS rating. My first tip is train your team and the government about CPARS. What is it? What am I expecting? What are you expecting? And so that's the government side. What do I expect of you, team? How can it benefit you, team? Frankly, team, if you're helping me get good CPARS for the company, then that reflects directly on you as an individual. So just teaching them and setting some expectations is the first tip. Second tip is clarify satisfactory criteria. What does it take for me to get satisfactory CPARS, right? And I'm just confirming that what it is are these task areas or something, right? That should be a very easy clarification, but do that at the beginning of every option year and base year on your contract. The third thing is then to also discuss ways to achieve very good and exceptional ratings. What do I need to do to go very good? What do I need to do to be exceptional, right? I know what CPARS language talks about. What do you want to see? Are there ways that we can exceed this in there? Blah, blah, blah. And it might be something as simple as, hey, I know we said the migration project will take 6 months. That's what we agreed to. If you're able to get that done in 5 months, 4 months, 3 months, that's exceptional. Okay. Well, then, I don't know if we'll be able to do it, but at least now I can track on it. The last two are about documenting. Document the kudos that you get and have your team trained up on how to hear people saying you did a great job. They did a great job. And then how to ask, would you mind shoot me an email to my boss? Just let me know. And then the last one is document the problems, both the problem and the resolution and how you resolved it, but also document it in a way of how was it effectively or highly effectively, how did you highly effectively address the problem, let's say in a way so it doesn't come back or you avoid future problems that could have been related. Do those things and you've got, I think, a good path for getting great CPARS. So that covers the topic. I hope you found it valuable. In fact, if you found it valuable, give it a thumbs up. I think that CPARS and selling is what all of us should be doing. So make sure you take this back to your company if you've got people inside the wire working with a customer and tell them some of the tips that I said. I wanted to remind you also that if you'd like to do a deeper dive into how to start and build relationships that lead to federal revenue, I've got a webinar Tuesday coming up on May 3rd, and you can register there for that on govconchamber.com. The last thing I'm saying, let me just look, see. I saw a question pop up. What if the random person refuses any assistance to see past clearly? We have included Osmo Office and still being ignored. So really quickly, what if I'm getting a bad job at CPARS at the end, especially if it's random people? There's a couple of things, right? My understanding, well, I don't want to name agencies, right? But there are agencies out there who just could care less. They're lazy and I hate it. Can't do anything about it. And they will just give everybody satisfactory. They don't want to do they don't want to do the work. That's bad for them and that's bad for industry, but it's way worse for the mission of that agency that they don't actually look to give people exceptional ratings. Because if you give satisfactory like that, that means you're bringing up people who are below satisfactory that you don't want to have to justify why they suck, right? Or why they do bad stuff. So satisfactory. Two things I can recommend to this question, right? It's a quick answer as I wrap up. The first thing is sometimes this just happens and you just got to suck it up. Sorry. Second thing is if you work through the whole year and really train them the next time, you should be able to avoid this. I know that's a very quick answer to a really big question, but that's all the time I have for today. So remember, government contracting, it's not a secret. It's just a process. I'll see you next time.